about 20 million people vaccinated by the end of just this month. And we have this vaccine summit today with a bipartisan group of governors, our retail chain pharmacies, our distributors, FedEx and UPS, to demonstrate just how well-oiled this machine is to get vaccines out there. Our governor said they have 100,000 more vaccinated within 24 to 48 hours.
Well, that's what I want to ask you. What exactly is the plan for dividing up the vaccine by state? And where does the federal responsibility end and that of state and local leaders begin to make sure that everybody who needs the vaccine gets it?
So it's been very transparent. We are allocating the vaccine as the governor's requested on a per capita basis, population 18 and over in the states. We buy the vaccine, we pay for the distribution of the vaccine. Us and private payers, we pay for the administration of the vaccine. We ask the governors, because they know the lay of the land, to tell us where they want the vaccine shipped. And we direct the shipment either directly from Pfizer in the case of their vaccine, or through McKesson, the world leading distribution company, in the case of the Moderna vaccine. If that goes to CVS, Walgreens, a hospital, a community health center, a public health lab, whatever the governors have according to their plans. They're almost like air traffic controllers within their state.
I'm asking in part because what we've heard from President-elect Biden is that he has not seen, that his team has not seen a clear plan for distributing the vaccine from the place where it gets shipped into the country, from where it's manufactured, into people's arms.
I'm sorry, it's just not true, Judy. We're incredibly transparent. I do with General Perna and Dr. Slawi an hour-long press briefing every single week where we walk through in minute detail down to dry ice levels how this is being distributed from the manufacturing plant to the distributor to where the governors have told us how we have kitted 100 million kits at McKesson of syringes and needles and PPE to have that happen. Every item is microplanned. Judy, this is the United States Army that is planning this out with the nation's leading distributors and shipping companies. As they say, this is what we do. We are using the tried and true tested system that gets hundreds of millions of vaccines and flu vaccines out every single year. Don't invent a new system when you have one that works.
And I'm also asking in part because there are local leaders who say they need more resources, they need funding in order to get the vaccine into every individual, whether it's in urban areas, rural areas. There is concern about that.
Well, Judy, as I've described, we've actually set up these partnerships with CVS, Walgreens, Kroger's, with our community health centers, our hospitals, to really take that burden away. Now, money's not going to be the barrier to ensuring, especially that our underserved get vaccinated or others, so we'll make sure that that is available. But it's also important that they understand, because there are a lot of myths out there about what the role is. The states and the local governments are not being asked to set up vaccine clinics, but rather to leverage the systems that already help get people vaccinated every single year.
Mr. Secretary, the United States, as you know, has 4% of the world's population, but it has 23% of the cases in the world of COVID-19. How did that happen? How did this administration oversee a situation where it is so disproportionately affecting the American people?
Well, Judy, as we just talked about, we're on the verge just days from having vaccine, and we are concerned about the number of cases, the hospitalizations we're seeing in the country, and we're asking people, please act responsibly. We want everyone to get to the day where they can get vaccinated. That means washing your hands, watch your distance, wear your face coverings when you can't watch your distance. Please be very careful.
But that message has been a mixed, excuse me for interrupting it, but a mixed message from the very top, has it not, Mr. Secretary?
I mean, every one of us who support and work for the president, the vice president today at the summit made clear those three revenues, and be careful about indoor gatherings, overcrowded indoor restaurants, overcrowded indoor bars, and household, multi-family, multi-household gatherings. These are settings of disease transmission, and I need your viewers to please be very focused on this as we approach the holiday season. Be careful, because I'm going to make sure that next year's holiday season, everybody is able to be together for a normal holiday season because of the vaccines, and we're working together to deliver to you.
Dr. Alex Azar, the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, thank you very much.
Thank you, Judy.
And we turn now to a physician who has long been involved in the study of contagious diseases and the vaccines developed to fight them. Dr. Carlos Del Rio is professor of global health and epidemiology at Emory University School of Medicine. Dr. Del Rio, thank you very much for joining us. What is your assessment of the Trump administration plan at this point to distribute the vaccine to Americans?
Well, Judy, let me just first start by saying that the achievement of getting a vaccine in record time and getting vaccines that are incredibly effective is just something that we all need to be not only very happy, but we need to be very proud. The research infrastructure, many years of research before this virus started, basic science research in mRNA technology has led to have a vaccine that is going to be really a key to ending this pandemic. The distribution is not going to be easy. The getting the vaccine to many people is not going to be easy. But I will tell you, and I agree with the Secretary, we are Americans. We put a man in the moon. We can get this done. It's going to require coordination. It's going to require people to collaborate. It's going to require people to work together. It's going to require funding. But I am convinced that we can get, as President-elect Biden has said, we can get 100 million doses in the next first 100 days of his administration.
And do you believe the administration can meet the deadline? We heard from Secretary Azar granted it will be the next administration in charge, but do you think that this vaccine can be delivered to everyone who needs it by the end of June?
I think so, and I hope that both administrations, again, this should not be Democrat or Republican. This should be both administrations. I would hope that Secretary Azar works very closely with Javier Becerra, and they coordinate this so there's a smooth transition, and it really doesn't matter who's in Washington, that we get Americans vaccinated. At the end of the day, we need to get vaccine into the arms of people, because vaccines don't save lives, vaccination saves lives.
Dr. Del Rio, what are going to be the hardest communities to reach? I mean, we're hearing about urban areas, inner city areas, we're hearing about communities of color, we're hearing about rural parts of the country. Where is the greatest effort going to be required, do you think?
The greatest effort, first of all, is going to be to have people trust the vaccine and to be willing to be vaccinated. And we live in a country that, unfortunately, because of years of racism and years of abuse by the healthcare and healthcare infrastructure of African Americans or Hispanics, the populations that need it the most may be the ones that are more reluctant to get the vaccine. They're not anti-vaxxers, they're not denials of the vaccine, they simply are distrustful of the system. So I think the first thing we need to do is we need to work with leaders in those communities, religious leaders, community leaders, to ensure that trust in the vaccine exists. The second thing is we need to be sure that the vaccine gets to every corner. So, it's not just going to be in the cities, it's going to be in rural communities, it's going to be in everywhere that we need to get the vaccine. But again, getting it to the most remote place in Alaska. But think about the postal system. Think about how the postal system gets letters everywhere that is necessary. And I think, I'm convinced that distribution systems such as, the ones that exist on Amazon, Coca-Cola, and pharmacies and the military can get it done. But it's not going to be easy, but at the end of the day, we have to get the vaccine to every single person that needs it.
It sounds that you are not concerned that the administration, for whatever set of reasons, decided not to commit to a second major shipment of the vaccine from Pfizer.
Well, I'm not sure. Again, I don't know what the details are. I would tell you, though, that the Pfizer vaccine is a vaccine that requires -80 refrigeration. It has some logistical complications that it may be that you don't need that vaccine. You may be wait for Moderna to get the vaccine EUA and then start using some of the other vaccines. Wait for AstraZeneca that does not require refrigeration. So I think it really is, each one of these vaccines is a little different, and maybe, I think the cold chain requirements of the Pfizer vaccine make it a pretty challenging vaccine. You're not going to be able to get the vaccine in very rural communities. You're not going to be able to get the vaccine in many places in the inner city simply because you're not going to have the cold chain required to distribute this vaccine.
Just very quickly, finally, Dr. Del Rio, is it clear in your mind who should get the vaccine first? And the healthcare workers, then those who live in nursing home, long-term care settings, and then after that, is it clear in your mind what the order should be?
Yes, Judy, it's clear in my mind. The National Academy of Medicine put out a report called Equitable Distribution of Vaccines, and I will look at that report. CDC has looked at that report, and that's the report that tells you in tiers how people should get the vaccine. And it starts with healthcare workers and those living in long-term facilities, and then it moves to teachers, and then it moves to first responders, and then it moves to students, and then it moves to different people in the general population until eventually we get everybody vaccinated. If we do it right, I agree with Secretary Azar. By the summer, we could have pretty much everybody that needs it vaccinated.
Dr. Carlos Del Rio, epidemiologist, physician at the Emory University School of Medicine. Thank you very much.
Delighted to be with you, Judy.
Now returning to President-elect Biden's choice to run the Defense Department, retired Army General Lloyd Austin. Several candidates were much talked about for this post. Biden's pick has sparked a variety of reactions. Here now, Nick Shifrin.
For 40 years, Lloyd Austin was a barrier-breaking soldier, the first black officer to command a division in combat and command a theater of war. He had some of the most difficult commands, including Iraq, before the 2011 U.S. withdrawal.
It's going to take the Iraqi government, the Iraqi people to continue to make the right decisions, work together.
President-elect Biden worked with Austin in Iraq and attended the ceremony where Austin received command. And the vice president's late son, Beau Biden, who died in 2015, served on Austin's staff. In an article today, Biden calls Austin calm and pressure and praised Austin's logistical success in withdrawing from Iraq. Biden says Austin will use those skills to quarterback COVID vaccine logistics. Biden wrote they aligned strategically, and Austin's nomination was a, quote, milestone.
This really is historic. Americans have served in higher numbers than the percentage of the population of the United States. So it's about time.
Dana Bitar is a retired two-star general who served with Austin in Iraq when they fought ISIS. He's the author of the book Hunting the Caliphate.
We had our forces with all of our coalition allies fight ISIS on numerous fronts. They took strategic vision and an operational approach to be able to pull that off. And that was General Austin.
Austin also served in the Pentagon as the former Army Vice Chief of Staff.
He ran the day in and day out staff business in the Pentagon. So he has intimate knowledge of things, at least on how the Pentagon should work as a single leader.
But Austin's nomination has critics. He retired only 4 years ago and would therefore need a congressional waiver to serve as the civilian Secretary of Defense. Congress has only approved that waiver twice. The former World War II five-star General George Marshall and for President Trump's first Defense Secretary James Mattis, Austin's predecessor at Central Command. In 2017, top Senate Armed Services Democrat Jack Reed supported Mattis's waiver, but warned it was the last.
Waiving the law should happen no more than once in a generation. Therefore, I will not support a waiver for future nominees.
Today, Reed kept his options open during a windy interview.
Explain himself more than
The Congress has, since the 1940s, required that for someone to become Secretary of Defense, that they have been separated from that chain of command for long enough time back into the private sector that they still, they aren't still part of that sense of following orders.
Danny O'Brien is the executive director of the Project on Government Oversight that proposed Austin and other prospective nominees. She also said Austin was only appointed Raytheon, one of the country's largest defense contractors, a few months after he retired.
We want someone who has a broader perspective than sort of the same old cycle of the military-industrial complex that has been spiraling now for decades.
And some regret the opportunity lost to have picked the first female defense secretary, Michelle Flournoy, who was on Biden's shortlist.
Well, I do feel like there's a sense of being let down from some folks, that they were really hoping that we'd be able to break this barrier.
Mika Oye is the senior vice president of the centrist think tank Third Way.
Having Lloyd Austin as Secretary of Defense, he's a big historic moment. He has broken barriers everywhere he's gone. race is very much still an issue in the military. But at the same time, so is gender. Both of those issues, racism and gender discrimination, are going to be on the plate for the next Secretary of Defense.
Austin's defenders say he is a warrior diplomat who can deal with those issues and align with President-elect Biden's restraint.
So who are tied to the Defense Department and who have been in combat themselves will be a little bit more reluctant to want to send our sons and daughters to combat unless it's absolutely necessary. And Lloyd Austin is that type of individual.
To the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
It's been 5 weeks since Election Day, but President Trump and many of his allies continue to question state election results, despite there being zero evidence of widespread voter fraud or irregularities. William Ryan reports on another milestone day in the 2020 election.
Judy, on next Monday, members of the Electoral College will meet in state capitals across the country to cast their votes officially for president. Most of those electors and how they will vote are already known to us because today is what's called the safe harbor deadline for those appointments. To look at where we are in the transition right now, as well as the president's continued resistance to it, I'm joined by Trevor Potter. He is the president of the Campaign Legal Center. He served as general counsel for John McCain's presidential campaign, and he was also the chair of the Federal Election Commission. Trevor Potter, great to have you back on the NewsHour. Before we get to these calendar issues that I was describing before, we still are seeing continued legal efforts by the Trump campaign to stop different states from certifying their votes. We saw one, the Supreme Court knocked one down just today from Pennsylvania. There was a new one filed also by the Attorney General in Texas. What do you make of these remaining lawsuits?
Well, truthfully, they're increasingly bizarre in the sense that they have no chance of stopping the Electoral College from voting and I think from Congress accepting those results. So they're best described as PR messages, maybe heartfelt by the people filing them, but I don't expect them to have any legal effect.
So as I mentioned, today is the safe harbor deadline. Again, just remind us what that means in the process of moving from the election to a new president being sworn in.
It's a date set by Congress that says if states get their electors in by that date, if they certify them by that date, then presumptively Congress will accept them. It's not a guarantee, but it is part of the timeline leading up to the voting by the electors on the 14th next Monday.
So is it your sense that there is anything that could legitimately interrupt this process from this week to next week to January?
In terms of the outcome, but no, there is nothing that would legitimately interrupt that process. The states have already certified their electors, and the electors will meet next Monday, the 14th, and both Congress will receive those votes on January 6th. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean there won't be noise in the process. I just mean the end result is now very clear. Some of the noise is the filing of these lawsuits, trying to get the Supreme Court to intervene and tell states not to designate electors, or telling Congress somehow not to count them, which is something the courts can't do, but what this is trying to do.
Pulling back a little bit and looking more broadly, what do you make of this effort that the president is undertaking to declare that the election was a fraud, that votes were stolen from him, that he in fact won, not Joe Biden winning this pretty decisive electoral victory? Is it your sense that this is just a man who doesn't want to concede and we're seeing the sort of tail end of that spasm, or is this something more substantive going on?
Well, I think what's going on has changed over the course of the last month since the election. Originally, it was a question of, are the votes being counted correctly? Are the votes that are being counted legitimate? Have they been examined? Are the machines reporting the right tally? That was then followed by a series of lawsuits that were, I think, increasingly far-fetched, alleging that somehow the system the states had used was wrong, and that a court ought to step in and say that, for instance, absentee ballots shouldn't be counted in Pennsylvania. All of that is now resolved. Those court cases are almost all over. The Trump campaign lost in every case. So the question becomes, what is President Trump doing, still saying that the election was somehow being stolen, that it was fraudulent? And I think at that stage, you have to say either he's being incredibly reckless in terms of refusing to accept that this is how people voted, this is what the Electoral College vote is, or something more dangerous, which is he's refusing to accept the result of the election personally and politically, because it helps him to be seen to keep fighting, to raise money for his new political committee. At some stage, it becomes just an attempt to undermine the president-elect and to make Americans think that the result of this election is somehow not legitimate. And that's really dangerous for our democracy. This year, it's not particularly close. There's a big Biden lead in the Electoral College and the popular vote, but next time, it might be really close and come down to one state. And in those circumstances, the idea that state legislatures should step in and ignore what the voters did and decide they're going to produce a different result because they don't like what the voters did is incredibly anti-democratic. It is not how a democracy elects its leaders.
All right, Trevor Potter of the Campaign Legal Center, thanks very much for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We continue our look now at the challenges for those coming out of incarceration. After being released, many struggle to find housing, which in turn can prevent them from getting treatment for an addiction or mental illness, securing a steady job, and ultimately staying out of jail. It's a situation made even harder by COVID-19. Tonight, Amna Navaz profiles one woman's quest for housing in Austin, Texas. It's the second in our series this week, Searching for Justice. For 4 months, a makeshift ramp under the North Austin Bridge was closed for Rachel Seiler and her husband, Ian.
It was hard to sleep in the bridge with the noise at first, but you kind of get used to it. It becomes like a white noise.
The 30-year-old says she'd been homeless for 5 or 6 years when she was arrested in January for forging checks and sent to jail. Her 1-year-old daughter was taken into state custody.
This was right before I was arrested.
Oh, she's so cute.
Thank you.
What's her name?
It was Olivia.
Released in April, Rachel's been cobbling together money from odd jobs for this hotel room. Virtual visits are now her only connection to Olivia.
My husband played for harmonica, and we read books. We sing to her, and she's too young to know anything about what's going on. So,
What do you say to a 14-month-old over there?
and when I got out of jail, she was around like 7 months old. You know, what do you say to a 7-month-old? They're audio, visual. You know, they want to touch stuff and put it all in their mouth. What is she gonna do over video to just get angry because I'm not really there?
To get her life on track and to get her daughter back, Rachel needs a job and a home, and soon. But she says her past is holding her back.
It's just, once you're in the system, even though I got time served and I'm done, I'm not on probation, my cases are finished, I'm still going to be punished for up to the next 10 years via I can't get a place to live. Or it's going to be difficult for me to get a job, to actually start a career. I've done my time and I've done my rehabilitation, but now I'm screwed.
Rachel's story isn't unique. A 2018 study by the Prison Policy Initiative found that formerly incarcerated people were nearly 10 times more likely to be homeless than the general population, especially upon release. And a 2019 study from the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition found that those who are homeless in turn are far more likely to be arrested for crimes like trespassing, panhandling, shoplifting, and assault.
It's not a matter of if you get arrested, it's a matter of when and then how long you're going to be gone.
An vicious cycle of incarceration and homelessness isn't going to find you.
My record, because of what it is, the apartment locators told me, well, we can't look for you. Yeah, but because you did this crime, we're going to hold it against you the way you can.